2020 has been a hard year, hasn't it? We've seen a virus which has swept through the world, causing untold pain and misery for millions of people. People in this country have suffered. People have been made redundant, perhaps have been on furlough. Fear and anxiety has gripped this nation in a way that perhaps it hasn't for many, many years. And people's mental health has struggled as a result. I don't know about you, I found it really hard this week being back in a lockdown, back at home with the rain lashing in every day. It's been hard. It feels like sometimes like your world has sort of shrunk down a bit. People's depression, people's anxiety has become worse in this situation. And that's no surprise, is it? Have you ever wondered, what is God up to in all of this? What's God doing in this? Is he just passive, totally taking a step back, not interested? Is he active, actually bringing the virus as some sort of punishment for something? Have we even considered what God might be up to? Have we even thought about God in all of this? Amongst the busyness of various rules and regulations and hand sanitizer and masks, have we even considered what God might be doing in this world through COVID-19? Well, we're going to be looking at chapter 29 and 30 in the book of Genesis as we look at Jacob's life. And we're going to see this morning Jacob going through hard times. Totally different in many ways to what we're going through, but nevertheless times of struggle, times of worry, times of difficulty for him. And we're going to see that despite what was going on in Jacob's life, despite all the things that were happening, God was working. God was working behind the scenes, keeping his promises and doing things for Jacob's good, things which Jacob could never have imagined when he was in that situation. And we're going to see two absolutely vital lessons about God, two truths about God this morning. The first is God is in control. God is in control. Now, a key bit of this passage that we have in front of us in chapter 29 and 30 is the providence of God. The providence of God in working all things to accomplish his plans. God is absolutely sovereign, completely in control of everything that happens, and he's providentially working everything that happens in Jacob's life to keep his promises and to do good to Jacob. And that includes providing a wife for Jacob. Now this is important, not just because Jacob wants to have a wife, but because God has promised that through Jacob and Jacob's family, all the peoples in the earth will be blessed. That presupposes something. It presupposes that Jacob has a family, and God is going to give him a family. He's going to provide a wife for him. So chapter 29, verse 1. Jacob is on a journey in verse 1, and in verse 2, he gets to a well in a field, and there are shepherds and there are various flocks around the well. And Jacob happened on that day to go into a field where the sheep and the shepherds belonged to Rachel. Just happened to be that day that he met some shepherds that belonged to Rachel, one of his relatives. Was that a coincidence? No, of course it wasn't a coincidence. God had ensured that Rachel and her sheep would be in that field at the same time that Jacob was wandering along on his journey. They could have left 5 minutes earlier and Jacob would never have met her. But of course God was providentially ensuring that they would meet and that they would fall in love and get married. And just look at verse 7. Look, he said, this is Jacob speaking. The sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture. The point here is Jacob saying, it's not the normal time to be out in the field. What are you doing? It was unusual for them to have their flocks out in the middle of the day, the heat of the day. Why were they there? Because God was ensuring that Jacob and Rachel would meet, that they'd fall in love with each other. God was providentially working so that Jacob would find a wife. They meet, verse 10, when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Using his muscles to woo the ladies, as men have been doing for 4,000 years, it seems. Well, it works because they fall in love. Jacob kissed Rachel, began to weep aloud, and he told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. Her father, Laban, is Jacob's uncle, Rebecca's brother, and so they're relatives, and they fall in love, and Jacob goes back to meet her father. Now there's a sense of déjà vu about this. I don't know if you picked that up. I'd be very impressed if you do. This is very similar to something else that has already happened in the Bible, where someone went to find a wife for someone and found one by a well. It's exactly the same as what happened in chapter 24, where Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac. And the servant went off and found Rebecca by a well. And here, Isaac's son Jacob goes off and finds a wife by a well. It's the same thing happening. The point being, God's promises to Abraham then went to Isaac and have now gone to Jacob. The promise is passing along through the generations. God is providing a wife so that he can keep his promises, so that through Jacob and Jacob's family, the whole world will be blessed. There's a sense of déjà vu about it. And so Jacob goes off, meets his uncle Laban. He starts working for his uncle, and his uncle says, look, it's not right that you work for free. What do you want? Verse 16. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel. So verse 20. Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. I think that is really sweet. I think that's one of the most romantic verses in the whole Bible. He worked for 7 years. They seemed like just a few days because of how much he loved her. That is romantic. Less romantic is verse 21. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My time is completed and I want to make love to her. Fair enough, I suppose. Verse 23. They have a marriage, a wedding celebration, a feast. But when evening came, he, Laban, took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. Verse 25. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? I mean, talk about awkward. Blimey. He's married the wrong woman. He slept with the wrong woman, the wrong sister. How did that happen? In Jacob's defense, it was dark. It was 4,000 years ago in the ancient Near East. They probably didn't have many streetlights. The irony, of course, is that Jacob, the deceiver, has been deceived. He himself has been deceived. Laban and Leah, who presumably also was in on this, they have deceived Jacob. And the real irony is, in the same way that his father Isaac was deceived because he couldn't see, also Jacob is deceived because it was dark and he couldn't see. Jacob has been deceived. But despite this, despite the sin of Laban and the sin of Leah, God is providentially working it so that Jacob will be blessed, because now he has 2 wives. He finished the week with Leah, the week of celebrations. Verse 28, then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. He has to work for another 7 years. So now at this point, he's got 2 wives. And despite the sin of Laban, despite the sin of Leah, God is going to work that situation so that he will bless Jacob and have even more, an even bigger family. God is keeping his promises despite the sin of other people. Now, when I was a kid, I was very, very competitive with my brother. Particularly when it came to any sports or any sort of game, I always wanted to win. I was desperate to win, passionate to win. Anything we played, I wanted to be the winner. And for the record, most of the time, I was the winner. But there was one sport, one thing that my brother was always better than me at. And it really bugged me. He was always better than me at tennis. Every time we played, he was always beat me. And when we played together and play our dad, he was always much better than me. And it really bugged me. I really hated it. I don't even like tennis. Tennis is rubbish. But the idea of not being the winner really got to me. I don't know if that was your experience. If you have a sibling, perhaps you're more balanced than I am. But many siblings sort of scrap against each other. They're competitive with each other. And boy, do we have that in this passage. This is a real family mess. Verses 29:31 to 30:24, that middle section, is all about the competitiveness of these two sisters, Rachel and Leah. Competitive to earn the love and affection of their husband, but also competitive in trying to bear as many children as they possibly can. They even get their servants in on the act. Look at verse 32. Leah has Reuben. 33, she has Simeon. 34, she has Levi. 35, she has Judah. Verse 1, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Jacob became angry with her and said, am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children? Then she said, here is Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her. What a terrible idea. Jacob would never go along with that, would he? Verse 4. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her. This middle section is sordid. It's foolish, but it's more than just foolish. It's sin. It's the sin of polygamy, of marrying more than one person at the time. It was not God's intention for marriage. It was wrong. And yet, despite all of that, despite the sin of the sisters, despite the deceiving, the competitiveness, the folly of all of this, God was working. Jacob comes out with 11 sons and a daughter from this chapter. He's going to have another son later on. 11 of the 12 children of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, these boys who became the father figures of the whole nation. 11 of the 12 were born here. God was keeping his promise. Jacob was going to have a big family that would one day bless the whole world. God was providentially working even through the sin of other people. And that's what the flocks is all about. The rest of chapter 30 is all about God giving Jacob many flocks, many animals who are strong, and giving Laban weak animals so that Jacob can prosper and be a wealthy individual and become a great nation. God was keeping his promises even through the difficult circumstances that Jacob was in. Now, all of this, of course, raises a big question. You may be thinking this. How can God work evil in the world and not be responsible for it? How can God use the evil of Laban, of Leah, of Jacob, and so on, the sin of these people, and yet not be morally responsible for it? How does God use evil and not be responsible for that evil? It's a big question, one that we see time and time again in the Bible, and there is a sense of mystery about this, and there are a number of ways to answer. But I think it's important to say something here. The first thing I want to say is that in some level, evil is not a thing. Evil is not a thing, it's a lack of a thing. It's a falling away, a lack of goodness, a lack of compassion, a lack of love, a lack of morality. It's a falling away of God's standards. If God's standards are here, and they are perfect, they are holy, righteous, love, peace, mercy, all of the good things in the world, sin and evil is a falling away, a corruption of those things. And so when human beings do those things, they are falling away, they have become corrupted from God's standards. It's not like sin and evil is this thing that has crept into God's world that then God uses. No, it's a lack of a thing, it's an absence of something, not a presence of something. And so God, when he remains totally sovereign over all things, totally in control of everything, he is able to use even the sinful actions of people and yet not be morally responsible. So, for example, when someone murders someone, the evil motive in that, it comes from the person. The evil motive of rage, of jealousy, of bitterness, of anger, whatever it might be. Those things are done by the human being. God, however, standing sovereign even over that action, does not do any of those bad things. He always does good. He always does love, compassion, kindness, mercy, all of those things. So in the same action, the motivation of the two actors, the two people who are acting, is totally different. The person, the murderer, always does bad, always wills, always purposes, always has a motive which is bad. But God always has a motive which is perfect and holy and pure. And in that way, God can use even the bad actions, the bad motives of human beings to accomplish good. Because God never does the bad, he always does what is good. And the people never do what is good in those actions, they always do the bad. In other words, the bad comes from people and not God. The good in the action comes from God and not people. And in that way, God is able to use even evil actions to accomplish good because he's never morally responsible for that. And that's what we have here in this passage. You can see God's providence is bookended. Chapter 29:31, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive. It was God who did that. And 30:22 at the end of this section, then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. God's providence bookends that section. So, despite people's sin, despite all that was going on, God was in control. God had a plan, even when Jacob was struggling, even when he didn't know what was happening in his life. God knew what was happening. God was working his plan. That's the first thing. First truth about God, that God is in control. The second is God is compassionate. God is compassionate. He's in control, but he's also compassionate. Two important truths about God. Now, I said earlier there was a sense of déjà vu about this story, that it was similar to what happened in chapter 24 when Abraham's servant went out. There's a key difference, though. The key difference is Abraham's servant went off to find a wife for Isaac, and he was praying. He was seeking God's guidance, asking for a sign, and when it happened, he was thanking God, and that is repeated time after time in chapter 24. There is none of that here. None of that in chapter 29. Jacob doesn't pray, doesn't ask for a sign of God's provision, doesn't thank him when he meets Rachel. There seems to be almost no spiritual awareness of Jacob here in this chapter. And yet, God providentially provided for him. God provided a wife. Why? Not because Jacob deserved it, but because God was compassionate to him. He was gracious. He was merciful. He provided for him. And that's what's happening with the sisters as well. Their plans are sordid, sinful. They're even pagan. Verse 14 of chapter 30, 14, 15 and 16, they barter with each other and they squabble over mandrake plants, which they thought were a sign of fertility. They even result here to pagan myths, pagan ideas that these plants gave them fertility in some way. But God is kind. He providentially provides a family for these two sisters, even when they don't deserve it. I mean, Rachel comes out of this with a son, Joseph. Joseph is going to be a key player in the rest of the story. And Leah. Leah, the wife who wasn't loved, who wasn't anything special, wasn't much of a looker. She has 6 of the 12 tribes that come from her, including Levi, the priestly line who would work in the tabernacle, offer sacrifices, a key family in the whole nation, and also the tribe of Judah, where all of God's promises will be kept. Jesus was a descendant of Leah. Isn't that extraordinary? Not of Rachel, but of Leah, the wife who wasn't wanted, who only became the wife through deceit. Jesus is a descendant of her. All of God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the whole of the Old Testament find their fulfillment in Jesus, and Jesus came from Leah. Isn't that God's compassion, his kindness to Leah? She didn't deserve it. It was God's compassion. He's compassionate to us. And so as we close, whatever 2020 brings for the last month and a bit, whatever 2021 brings, even in the hard times, the times of struggle, of perhaps we think we can't carry on, perhaps where our mental health is at breaking point, perhaps where we lose loved ones, even through tears and anxiety, we can remember these two truths from this passage. God is absolutely in control, working all things for our good, even when we don't see it, even when we don't experience it, even when it's not feeling good at the time. We know that God is working things for our good, and he's compassionate. He loves us. He cares for us. He gives us good things even when we don't deserve it. And he calls us to come to him, not to run away from him in our struggles, but to come close, because he loves us, he cares for us, and he sent his son Jesus to die for us, to show us that love. He's in control and he is compassionate. So let's come to him now.